the issue of innovation is much more than you might realize a key to the success or otherwise of any future economic system. And in fact, it was the failure of innovation in the Soviet Union that was a major cause of its failure to compete with the capitalist world market. And that spelled doom in the end for its survival. Yet the subject of innovation, how it can be accelerated and positively directed to improving humanity in a democratic socialist society, is rarely, if ever, discussed on the left, never mind addressed. And I would say any Socialist Manifesto must deal with this question if it's to offer a credible way forward. Now, just quickly to start by defining a few of the words, the terminology we're going to be using in this session, okay? First of all, science, to say something about science. Now, science is as a definition, is the search for knowledge of the universe, to advance knowledge about the universe. Technology is the application of this scientific knowledge to solving practical problems. Now, I'm sure you've probably all got other definitions of these, but these are just some simple ones. And innovation is a broader concept which includes technology, but it also includes any changes made to any aspect of the world. And this could include introducing new techniques, new ways of doing things, new processes that may not involve new technology, but they're better ways of doing things. So it's a broader concept. So that's why we use the term innovation. So talking about science, under feudalism, some of the aristocracy were interested in science. You got a lot of the aristocracy were just interested in enjoying their wealth and protecting it. But there was a minority who were interested in science as a pure form in the search for pure knowledge. But generally speaking, they weren't interested in the application of science to day-to-day problems. And this is where the capitalists came into play. A famous expression said that where the aristocrat looked up through a telescope at remote galaxies, the capitalist wanted to look downwards into the world beneath his feet and find out what needed to be done to turn material reality into a saleable commodity. And this changed forever the role of the thinker and the doer. Thinking henceforth was measured by its ability to make profit or to comprehend the world so that profit could become more likely. So this is a quotation from, if I remember rightly, from William Morris, that fantastic British socialist in the 19th century. Now, capitalism, as distinct from feudalism, was a completely innovatory system. And I'd like to give here a quote from Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, a famous quotation, which I've cut into the relevant parts. So they said in this, they talk a lot about this subject in the Communist Manifesto, and they say the following: the bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All old established national industries are dislodged by new industries, whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. The cheap prices of its commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, with which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, the application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even a presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? So it's a long quotation from them, but I think it sums up amazingly well what was even happening in 1848, in the early years of capitalism. And obviously that process has continued ever since. Now, one of the biggest arguments for capitalism is this ability to innovate. In this, it was obviously superior to the preceding stages of civilization. Significant sections of society are inspired by the ability of capitalism to innovate and compare this ability as a decisive advantage over other systems, such as the bureaucratic planned economies of the Soviet bloc. Now, talking about the difference between science and technology, which we defined, I'd like to look at the Soviet Union as an example. At one time, the Soviet Union had 50% of the world's scientists, which reflected the massive percentage of people going to university, the priorities of Soviet society for education, and the encouragement of the Soviet Union for science and industry. Now, as a result of that, great basic science was carried out. But with the exception of military and space applications, these scientific developments were not applied to day-to-day life, so little advancement in normal technology and in consumer products took place. Now, if we contrast the experience of Japan to the Soviet Union, it's very illuminative, especially if we look at the period in the 1970s and 1980s. In the 1970s, Japan was spending 2.5% of its gross domestic product on research and development, while the Soviet Union was actually spending more than 4%. Yet Japan eventually grew much faster than the Soviet Union because research and development funding was spread across a wider variety of economic sectors, not just those focused on the military and space. And of course, Japan was in the advantageous position that they were protected by America and didn't actually, they were prevented from spending much money on the military, and they didn't have a space program to talk of at that time. In Japan, there was also a strong integration between research and development, production and technology at the enterprise level, whereas in the Soviet Union, there was separation at each stage. Crucially, the Soviet Union did not have organizations through which to commercialize the technologies that they were developing. Meanwhile, Japan had a strong user-producer linkage, which was non-existent in the Soviet system. And Japan also encouraged innovation with incentives provided to management and the workforce of companies, rather than focusing mainly on the ministries of science. So for these reasons, you know, the science that was developed within the Soviet Union was not put to use. And as a result, we didn't see the development of Soviet products for the consumer or for light industry that could have been sold across the planet and given competition to the capitalists. I mean, you never came across Soviet products in shops anywhere, and it wasn't just because of boycotts, but there weren't the products to sell. Even the Soviet Union, when you went to the shop, a lot of the shops were empty or had very little in them. I remember visiting the Soviet Union and wanting to buy a camera, and the camera I bought was good quality, but it was basically based on technology from the 1950s. Now, the same criticism is actually made not just against the Soviet bloc, but it's also made against state-owned industries in the capitalist countries. It's accepted that business is the innovative force, and the state is cast as the inertial force. It's necessary for the basics, but it's too large and heavy to be a dynamic engine. Now, some of this is true, but actually when you look into it, a lot of this is mythology. So let's have a look at some examples of this. Now, I think most of us have heard about the example of Apple. You know, Apple is the most valuable company in the world. I think it's $2 trillion on the stock market at the moment. And it's regarded as one of the forces in technology. But if you look at how the key technologies in the products we know about, like the iPad and the iPhone, you actually find that the key technologies were developed in universities with government funding. And that the contribution of Steve Jobs, in particular, was essentially presentational. You know, he pulled together these technologies and presented them in a very attractive way and marketed them very successfully. But in terms of the actual innate technology, that they were developed with public funding. But this is just one well-known example. Most of the radical revolutionary innovations that have fueled the dynamics of capitalism, from railroads to the internet, to modern-day nanotechnology and pharmaceuticals, they actually trace the most courageous, early and capital-intensive entrepreneurial investments back to state investment coordination. From the development of aviation, nuclear energy, computers, the internet, biotechnology, and today's developments in green technology, it is and has been the state, not the private sector, that has kick-started and developed the engine of growth. Because the state's willingness to take risks in areas where the private sector has been too risk-averse. For a couple more examples, how many people know that the algorithm that has led to Google's great success was actually funded by a public sector National Science Foundation grant? Or that molecular antibodies, which provided the foundation for biotechnology before venture capital moved into the sector, were discovered in the Public Medical Research Council labs in the UK. How many people realize that most of the innovative young companies in the US were actually funded not by private venture capital, but by public venture capital, provided by the Small Business Innovative Research Program? Even the much lauded Elon Musk of Tesla electric cars fame, who's now becoming one of the richest people in the world, even he was only able to move into mass production through the grant of over $100 million by the government to enable him to buy and refurbish his California factory. Even if we take the discovery of the internet and the development of the more later nanotechnology industry, which is yet to which promises to develop industrial production tremendously, but we haven't seen that yet. Both have happened due to the vision that the government had in an area that had not yet been seen by the private sector. And even after these new technologies were introduced by the government, the private tech sector was still too scared still too scared to invest. Government even had to support the commercialization of the internet. In biotechnology and the internet, venture capital arrived 15 to 20 years after the most important investments were made by the public sector. So we can see here how crucial public funding has been to development of all these sectors, contrary to the mythology. And in fact, part of this mythology is that of the heroic entrepreneur, you know, the individual who worked in their garage or slaved away for years developing their product, and through their heroic endeavor, they were able to develop fantastic inventions. In fact, actually, if you look at a lot of these entrepreneurs, these famous entrepreneurs, they died penniless, and their great inventions were stolen. People like Tesla, people, you know, the inventor of the light bulb, and many other, the inventor of the telephone, the inventor of the television, they didn't get the benefit. These were taken over by much better funded capitalists, and people like Edison and so on. And in fact, over the last century, that was in the 19th century, but over the last century, the myth of the heroic entrepreneur has increasingly become a rarity. And the process of innovation in products, processes, and marketing has become increasingly collectivized in its nature. And basically, that now most inventions, most patents are taken out by big companies with the resources and not by individuals. In fact, it's become increasingly difficult for individuals to get funding from any sources. For example, the venture capitalists argue that, well, it's not worth them lending $200,000 to somebody or £100,000 because it takes too much work to be able to investigate. They much prefer to lend much larger amounts. And unless we reject the myth of this heroic individual entrepreneurs, which is still spread around by capitalists in their ideologies. And unless we reject this myth and help start to build institutions, organizations of collective entrepreneurship, which we'll talk about later, we'll never actually see the poor countries grow out of poverty. This myth is actually helping the poorer countries of the world remain poor. The point we'd like to make is that actually to generate innovation nowadays, you have to be part of a collective activity. And that activity doesn't just depend on one brilliant individual, it depends on a whole network of actors and links and relationships. So, for example, the steps that are taken between the basic science to large-scale research and development to applications, and finally to diffusing innovations is not a linear one. Rather, innovation networks are full of feedback loops that exist between markets and technologies, applications and science. In the linear model, the research and development system is seen as the main source of innovation that reinforce economists' use of R&D statistics to understand growth. But in the more non-linear view, the roles of education, training, design, quality control, and effective demand are just as important, as are the rules imposed by the state for how the market works and so on. The state's role is not just to create knowledge through national labs and universities, but also to mobilize resources that allow knowledge and innovations to diffuse broadly across sectors of the economy. It does this by rallying existing innovation networks or by facilitating the development of new ones that bring together a diverse group of stakeholders. This is within capitalism, and this will become even more so in the Democratic Socialist Society. However, having a national system of innovation that is rich in horizontal and vertical networks is not sufficient. The state must also lead the process of industrial development by developing strategies for technological advance in priority areas. In so many cases under capitalism, major companies are unwilling to think and invest long-term. They regard this as too risky, and their shareholders are not willing to wait beyond a few years for returns. Instead, they act as parasites on the public's purse, feeding off the benefits of research. Even worse, they rely on government research and development funds, so much so that the public investments have become business giveaways, making individuals and their companies rich, but providing little return to the economy or the state. If we hope to surpass capitalism, we have to be able to develop a better and more effective form of innovation. Yet the left rarely, if ever, think about or talk about this key issue. So I want to look here at a few negative examples of capitalist innovation. Now, one of the biggest problems of capitalist innovation is its lack of planning. Under capitalism, companies do their own research and development. If they do any research and development, they do it on their own. And there is no coordination between them. So obviously, that leads to all sorts of potential inventions and innovation being lost. If you look at the alternative model, the universities and scientists in the universities, you'll see how, particularly in areas like health and other fields, how the scientists publish their work and how they work together in teams across the world and how they communicate with each other. And the competition they have between each other is often very healthy, as well as going side by side with cooperation. And as a result, we see lots of advances made because of that. But capitalism doesn't work like that, because the capitalists are rivals, and they hold on to their inventions, they hold on to their knowledge, they don't want to share with any other capitalists. And so all sorts of combinations and hybrid developments that could take place are lost. Now, an exception to this was found in the developmental states in Asia in the post-war period. These were countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, etc. And in those countries, the governments instructed their companies on what product lines to focus on, and they coordinated technological applications, and they gave assistance where possible. And the result was a major leap forward for these countries, which completely undermines this advance that we saw in these countries, completely undermines the anti-state planning and anti-state investment arguments put forward by the capitalist states today in their neoliberal ideology. Now, of course, in this period, the East Asian states had big advantages. For example, they received considerable US post-war aid and were given most favored nation treatment so they could export into the massive US market without tariffs. And this was all part of an attempt to counter the very real threat of revolution in those countries and the influence of the Soviet Union in that region. The strategy of economic development, of coordinated technological development, succeeded. But this strategy is long gone in these countries, and we now see their growth rate has dramatically fallen since then. The worst example of that being Japan, of course, which has been in. I don't know if any of you had the chance to read Michael Roberts' latest post, in which he goes into the history of Japan in the last 20 years and shows how it's stagnated. Now, the overall lack of coordination of innovation and capitalism leads to too much investment going into some sectors and too little into others. A classic example was the internet boom of 1995 to 2000, which led to a massive collapse in investment and a depression, well, not depression, recession. This lack of planning of capitalism also means that a lot of potential advantages for combined and hybrid development is lost, and resources that might be needed to build on the new technology are not made available in time. The best way to understand this is to compare the typical capitalist situation. This approach, we can see the big advantages of planning. Now, even with the limitations of bureaucratic control in China, they have been able to make some of the fastest development in the world history. And this is continuing. If you look at their latest Made in 2025 plan, China has identified the main new emerging technologies internationally that will be key in the next period, and has allocated funding for research and development. But not only that, they have also arranged for needed manufacturing, educational, workforce, housing, and other resources to make it happen. And the potential for the integration of these new technologies, they've looked at how they can be integrated into the existing economy. Obviously, this has to be far superior to the chaos and lack of planning in the capitalist world and the lack of investment. Now, the need for planning, this need for planning for innovation is actually growing, particularly with the speed of innovation. I want to say something about the speed of innovation here. Now, some of you will be familiar with the difference between linear development and exponential development, especially if you pay a mortgage on a house. But let me explain it, because this is very important in terms of innovation. The rate of innovation of knowledge today is generally estimated at about 5% per year. It's growing at about 5% per year. Now, if this was a linear growth, that would be pretty fast. It would mean that if it was taking place in a straight line, it would take about 20 years of 5% growth, obviously, to double the size of human knowledge. 5 by 20 equals 100. But in fact, this knowledge is occurring in an exponential way, with growth not growing in a simple additional way, but compounding on itself each year. So in the second year, the 5% is not of 100%, it's of 105%, slightly more in fact than that. In the third year, it's 5% of 110%, and so on. The result is that this doubling doesn't take place in 20 years, it takes place in 14 years. So we're in an age of incredible acceleration. And if you look back at human history, in the first stage of human-directed technology, it took tens of thousands of years to move from the wheel to stone tools. But then it kept accelerating, because when we had stone tools, we could use them to build the next stage. So a dialectical leap, now often referred to as a paradigm shift, like the printing press, only took a century to be invented and then to be applied. Now such a shift, like the internet, takes only a few years' time. The lack of planning of innovation under capitalism will lead to a faster pace of disruption and dislocation. As innovation speeds up, the faster will be the disruption and dislocation that comes from it. And the lack of planning, the worse that will have, chaos that will create. And not only does this create in technological terms, but it creates this human chaos and human discontent that will inevitably go with this. Our current economic system is fundamentally incapable of dealing with this rising technological whirlwind. And if we don't control this increasing speed of technological development, it will control us. And this is leading to a potential dystopian future. We have the threat, for example, of surveillance capitalism, where capitalism is able, through the use of technology, more and more to understand everything we're doing, read every email, listen to every telephone, follow us on every camera, to understand every product we are buying, every thought we're having. I mean, take the example of Facebook. They say that Facebook now knows more about us by far than our partners do, our married partners or family. Because they're able to study everything we like on the internet, everything we don't like, everything, all our reactions and so on. And they're able to use psychological analysis to be able to understand what that means. And they are able, and through that, they're able to learn how to manipulate our emotions and desires and apply that with public relations and deep learning. We see that in the field of politics, where even we saw in the last American election and the last British elections, how they used their knowledge of people on Facebook to be able to target them and manipulate their emotions. Find out people who were afraid of crime and then send them information about, a campaign about guns, etc., etc. And it worked. It had a huge effect, according to most analysis. We also have the potential where the rich and their children could be made super intelligent and super healthy by biological development. Already, the wealthy are getting expensive infusions of young cells harvested in poorer countries. And these are just a couple of examples. We could talk about so many. The future, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but the future danger of robots taking over, artificial intelligence taking over the planet, and so on. These questions are realistic if we don't take control of this technology. Now, another negative result of capitalist technology is the waste that it entails. And we see the waves of innovation in capitalism are generating an incredible level of waste. And if you, like I had the privilege, so-called, of working in American multinational for 12 years. And it was amazing to see the incredible waste generated by new technology, by new methods of distribution, new methods of retail and so on. Incredible amount of money was lost and human capital was lost as these things came in rapidly. And in fact, this process can become so quick that it becomes destructive and ruinous even for capital itself. And the fast devaluation of prior investment before their value has really been recovered becomes a more and more serious problem. Let's look at the effect on people. Unplanned technological change under capitalism continually renders today skills obsolete. It destroys jobs and it displaces workers. And this imposes great hardship on people. It throws away the old workers, who it regards as dispensable, and focuses on new, younger generations. It has huge human and geographical disruption, with workers are expected to go where the work is, not for work to go where the workers are. We can also talk about the negative uses of innovation, because innovation, like everything else, can be used for positive or negative purposes. Let me bring up a couple of examples of this. Well, before I do that, one more thing I would like to mention is also, this affects particularly the poorer countries in the world. It's the question of intermediate technology. Only 2 billion out of 7 billion people of the planet are actually regarded as potential customers. The rest are regarded as too poor. So when they talk about the world market, they're actually talking about a minority of the world's population, because a majority of the world's population existing on $2 or $3 a day don't have enough money to buy these products that they're making. And this is where we have a need for intermediate technology. There is a movement for this internationally, where basically what you do is you take existing technology and you produce cheaper, more usable formats that can be used for the poorer people. Now, obviously, in the long run, we want to take people out of this poverty so we can bring them up to the same level as the rest. But in a socialist society, in a democratic social society, one of the first things we must do is we have to use the research and development funding that we have to start to bring the benefits of technology to the mass of people in the poorer countries. Then I want to say something briefly about state spending on science and technology. We have very little public input into the major sums that are currently spent by each state. And the majority is spent on military applications. I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. Okay. We also have this mass destruction of jobs and skills threat coming from the Industrial Revolution. They call it Industrial Revolution 4.0. With the extension of artificial intelligence and robots to more areas of work, we are facing the possibility of massive job losses and rising unemployment. Now we're reassured by people, well, we've had this talk in the past, that, it's been predicted that technology will replace all the jobs and everybody will be unemployed. And this, we know now, they say, the capitalists say, that, jobs that are destroyed, new jobs are created. But under capitalism, there's no guarantees of this. And capitalism doesn't exist to provide such guarantees. All they are doing is trying to introduce technology to save costs and make things cheaper to produce and make more profit. So there are no guarantees that these job losses are going to be lost, are going to be replaced. And when you look at the scale of the application of artificial intelligence robots, almost every job in the future is logically going to be able to be done by these machines. I mean, just take the example of self-driving vehicles, which they are fast developing. In the US alone, there are 5.7 million licensed truck drivers in America. And the aim of this technology, one of the main aims, is to be able to replace those truck drivers, especially long distance ones, but more and more locally in the cities. There are millions of taxi drivers. And obviously their idea is to replace them with self-driving vehicles. But it's not just truck drivers and factory workers who are going to lose their job with technology and are losing them. The better software and better robots are already beginning to replace lawyers, bartenders, even surgeons. And there is no limit to every field that could be applied to this. Now, in a social society, of course, there's no lack of potential new jobs. We need huge amount of jobs in the caring professions to look after people. But capitalism is not interested in that. In fact, they're in the process of cutting such caring jobs. Another problem, of course, is that there's a growing tendency in the advanced countries for the majority of new jobs to be lower paid and more insecure. After all, new technology is being brought in by these capitalists specifically aimed at eliminating well-paid permanent jobs. And of course, the benefits of the new technology is not going to the mass of people, which is what it could be doing. I mean, think about it. In a democratic social society, the introduction of robots and artificial intelligence should be a fantastic development. It should mean that we have less working hours to the point where we only work the hours we want to, and the robots do all the rest. But that's not the aim of the introduction of technology. It's designed to get rid of labor. So we could end up with this dystopian future where the robots are doing all the work and the rest of us are unemployed and poor, living in shanty towns around cities. And it's not actually accidental that if you look at the Hollywood movies of the future, that's the future they kind of come up with. They don't come up with a hopeful future. They don't come up with an optimistic future. And with the rise of the tech billionaires, we see the profits are all going to these characters. The benefits of technology are going to the top. And even in the pandemic, look at what we're seeing. We're seeing the tech billionaires getting richer by the day. I think in one week or something ridiculous, or 1 month, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, got 50 billion richer. And these guys, I mean, I remember when I was young, we used to talk about millionaires as being incredibly rich. You know, we used to look up, that was the dream, to be a millionaire in Hollywood was selling and everything. But no, it's billionaires. This is 1,000 times more wealth in 20 or 30 years change. But now they're talking about who's going to be the first trillionaire. And it's no longer, to be a billionaire is nothing. It's how many billions you have. And they're jockeying and competing with each other. The rich have got no limit to their appetites. Then we're talking about I haven't got time, there's a whole question of copyrights and patents, which is a very interesting question, which I haven't got time to go into here. But the way that science operates under capitalism, they use these copyrights and patents to protect intellectual property and inventions and so on. And you know, the idea that most people have got is that you've got the lonely inventor. You know, we talked about earlier, the myth of the lonely inventor. He works and sweats his guts out to make some new invention. He wants to protect it. He doesn't want to be stolen. But the copyrights and patents nowadays, don't protect those people. They protect the rich. They protect the big companies. And in fact, often what happens is the big companies steal those inventions if they are invented by some individual. And that individual hasn't got the resources to take them to court. So they're left without the benefits of things. And what the big corporations are doing is they play with these copyrights and patents. And they're using them to keep control of all the inventions and knowledge and keep it away from the mass of people. Under a democratic socialist society, we would be wanting to spread the benefits of knowledge and inventions. And in fact, one of the advantages of countries like China, which for a long period didn't protect copyrights and patents, didn't have these laws, was that you saw a sharing and a copying and an ecology develop, which meant that actually inventions and copyrights actually developed much faster. And if we look at, let me just give the example of the COVID epidemic at the moment. Look at how the different companies are jockeying to be able to control the vaccine. And even countries are even want to control the vaccines. So they get their people get it first, and the companies can charge big money for it. There's going to be a big battle about that, isn't there? I don't know if any of you follow open source on the internet, which is Wikipedia, the whole movement of people doing open source software so that you don't pay for the software. And that movement has shown how you don't need to protect everything for things to be developed. And a lot of the best software is now free. There's a lot of things I would like more to talk about, which we'll go into in the manifesto about the lack of popular input into the science and technology research of every country, and the way that the money that is spent, and large amounts are spent. You know, typically a lot of countries are spending 2% of their gross national product on research and development, so large amounts of money. A large amount of that, often 50% of that, is being spent on military research and development. And rather than that being to the benefit of human beings, you know, to solve disease, grow better crops, develop better housing, and solve the environmental problems and so on, it's going to military weapons, which are just going to bring more death and destruction. And the problem is that the population are never consulted about what their money is spent on science and research and development. If they were, I have no doubt that they would decide that their priorities would be the human ones and not the destructive ones. I'll go into more detail about that in the document. Then we come on to the question of drugs more widely. I talked about the COVID example. One of the most dramatic examples of the wrong priorities of research and development establishment is in the field of health. For example, the World Health Organization estimates that 18 million people die every year of preventable and curable medical conditions because of the high cost of drugs. If you take AIDS just as one example, over 10 million people died of AIDS between 1996 and 2003 because of the exorbitant high cost of drug therapies. The drug companies were just unwilling to reduce their charges for the poorer countries, and patients died unnecessarily without treatment. And this not only destroyed those individuals, but the families and communities who relied on them, and severely set back these countries economically. Now, contrary to popular conception, which is encouraged by massive television advertising, the pharmaceutical industries are not the source of most medical advance. Most significant new drugs are produced mainly with public, not private funds. Take vaccines, for example. The main drug companies have stopped vaccine research because they don't want to produce a drug that is taken once to prevent disease. Why would they? They don't want to cure diseases. Where's the ongoing profit from that? No, they want long-term customers. They're looking for drugs that treat diseases over a long period and have to be used again and again. The coronavirus is a good example. If you look into the research that's been done into the vaccine, and you listen carefully to all the different groups that are looking into it, you'll hear the same refrain. The real research is being led by a university science department or something like that. And the drug companies are working in partnership with them. But the drug companies are not doing the research. They're only acting as facilitators of the testing, the manufacturing and distribution. And ironically, they will make the big profits in that process. Private pharmaceutical companies divide their budgets half between marketing and half between producing Me Too drugs, which are just slight variations of existing drugs. And the aim of that is to continue with their existing profitable drugs or to take market share from their rivals. In fact, in recent years, the chief executive officers of the large pharma companies have admitted that they have decided to downsize and in many cases eliminate their research and development labs. That's an incredible fact that they've cut back their labs and in many cases got rid of them. And this is because of their recognition that in the open model, as they call it, of innovation, most research is obtained by public labs or by smaller biotechnical firms, which they can then leech upon. Then the last example I'd like to give is the internet. Now, the ability to communicate is a profoundly important issue for the development of mass dissent. For example, the development of printing technology in the 14th and 15th century had a huge impact on the religious, economic, and political life of Europe. By allowing the mass of people to read the original religious texts in their own language, they were for the first time able to compare the actual ideas expressed in them to the very different teachings of the Catholic Church, and to compare the original prescriptions to the corrupt behavior of the Church's functionaries. This printing press allowed dissenters to distribute their ideas for the first time. And the wide circulation of Martin Luther's religious pamphlets helped develop the Protestant Reformation movement and greatly undermined the Catholic-dominated feudal society. Less well known is the fact that the socialistic leveller movement that formed the popular background of the English Revolution in the 1640s had its own weekly newspaper which had a mass readership. The internet, however, will have a far, far larger impact on struggle than the printing press in the long run. Allowing people all over the world to instantly communicate at a fraction of the previous cost is an absolute requirement for the development of internationalism. Until now, how could the workers of the world really unite when they couldn't even communicate with each other? Now, I can recall trying to develop an international trade union coordination in the 1970s and 80s at a rank-and-file shop stewards level. In the end, we had to drop our plans because even linking up British and French union representatives proved too expensive. You know, the phone calls, we just couldn't afford the phone calls. And we didn't have emails and other forms of communication. Post was too slow. The government institutions, on the other hand, the companies and trade union bureaucracies, were the only ones able to establish and maintain the necessary level of international communication. Compare that to today. It is a revolution indeed. Thank you. As the internet develops, it is increasingly offering the potential for people everywhere to instantly talk to each other, to critique events and to compare ideas. This is a mind-blowing development, the consequences of which none of us can conceive. It is a fundamental challenge to the monopoly of ideas that the capitalist media has been able to establish in the past. A monopoly that has allowed them to successfully abuse and manipulate the limited form of democracy we have. Take our manifesto as a good example. The coherent and practical ideas we are developing here for replacing capitalism can easily spread across the world. But like everything in the universe, innovation can be a positive or negative benefit. If you take a glass, it can be used to drink out of or to smash over someone's head. And all technological developments have a positive and negative potential, none more so than the internet. On the one hand, in Wikipedia, it provides the greatest repository of human knowledge ever seen, or the potential for all humans to communicate with each other. It gives us the chance to express our wishes and feelings and bring real democracy into being. On the other hand, it can be used to atomize us, to divide us, to trivialize discussion, to divert attention, and to deceive us. And the internet can also be a powerful device for the state to monitor and track dissent and dissenters. It can confuse people, as we can see with the spread of all kinds of crazy ideas and conspiracy theories. Fundamentally, it all depends on who is controlling the machine. Under capitalism, we see that the internet companies, in their sole pursuit of profit, are debasing the positive potential of the internet. Facebook and Instagram, Google and Twitter, to name the biggest, are clearly out of control. They have become just too important to the health of society to be left as private companies, and need to be brought under democratic public ownership and run as accountable public utilities. Now I come on to what I want to talk now, finish off with, is talking about, I've talked about in some examples, but give a few more examples about innovation under democratic socialism. And here I would like to ask Roy to talk about how we could tap into the knowledge and creativity of workers. Roy, you want to unmute yourself?
Right, I'm here.
By the way, Roy, sorry. I'm sorry this session taking a long time, but as you can see, there's a hell of a lot of stuff comes under this title. So I hope you guys, I hope you can appreciate it.
Well, there'd be no room for anybody else to talk, Pat.
I know, I'm very sorry about that, Roy. Sorry about that.
Okay, let's see where I am on this. Oh, there we are. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Just to sort of, don't want to prolong that discussion, but just to add a couple of things. All that ideas and technology, all the spin-offs from the space, the massive money that the state invested in the space race and the military that you referred to, Pat, you know, the iPhone and all the rest of it, are all the aspects of that were actually state funded. But there's also this active. There's also other things, I think, where there's this myth about the capitalists being the cavalry, you know, are going to come and invest and develop stuff. I remember when I used to work for Royal Mail just before it was privatised, and we were told, you know, the arguments, we didn't believe them, of course, but we were told that, you know, they needed to get funds. We didn't have enough money. The government wasn't giving us any money. We would have to have funds to invest in new plant and machinery, etc., 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 etc. And of course, what materialised after that and after privatisation was that actually the intention, in a sense, was to run the industry down, in fact. And we got we got shareholders and they got dividends and you know, it's just a circus, isn't it, this shareholding thing. And so we're on a rearguard action and fighting for the defence of the industry. Not that we swallowed the idea of the capitalists coming to our rescue, but that was certainly part of their propaganda, and it probably affected a lot of people. And the other thing, just to quickly mention as well, apart from the all these spin-offs, there's direct subsidies. I mean, it's not just that they're benefiting from work that is done by the state. The state directly subsidise these new companies. And just a little thing I found here, you know, that there's supply and demand side benefits for these firms like Tesla Motors and Solar City and SpaceX. You know, you've heard of these, you certainly know about the Tesla, you mentioned it. They've had £4.9 billion in local, state and federal government support, such as grants, tax breaks, investments in factory construction and subsidised loans. Enormous amounts of money that you don't know, but these firms are being given. And they also, interestingly, they create a market as well. Certainly in terms of Tesla and the green products, they grant tax credits and rebates to consumers for social panels and electric vehicles, and so there's a massive benefit for the Tesla and other companies, because the tax credits and the rebates that have been given for that side of it. And just to say briefly that you know, Tesla sells more cars in Norway than it does in America because of that, like, supply side funding that the Norwegian government does. It subsidises it because they want to have a green vehicle thing. So interesting, and I agree entirely with you, Pat, about exploding that myth, and that's what we have to do. In terms of the workers, I don't think there's going to be, having listened to what you've said, there's not going to be any. So we have to worry about that, I don't think. You know, the current state of affairs in industry is, and I think it starts, I mean, it has to be said as well that, you know, from the education, these people who do the innovation, it's not the ordinary workers. And, you know, although in modern times and with the you know, in the sort of late 19th century, we had compulsory education. Before that, no workers was going to be involved. All the innovations, the great scientists and industry leaders and artists and musicians and writers, they're all from the middle and upper classes. You know, there was nothing for the workers, to be quite honest. And although workers now are much more highly educated, much more opportunity, much more people going to university, I think it's still the fact worldwide that it's about sort of 7 or 8% of people who have got a college degree. The mass of the population are not involved at all in this. And in the world of work, when you go to work, you for most workplaces, you're employed to carry out tasks that somebody else tells you to do, the manager, the owner. And all that goes very much back to the master and servant relationship that existed. And I do remember, not that long ago, I mean, it is a long ago, really, 20, 30 years ago, it was one of the disputes, I don't know if it was the print dispute in Wapping or what, now I forget. But, you know, you had to try and solve this problem. They brought out the Lord Chief Justice or somebody, you know, they'll always got someone to wheel out and make a legal recommendation. He mentioned the Master and Servant Act, would you believe? And so that process is that's where this comes from. That you know, the employer owns your labour for the period of the contract. That's all the time you're at work. You've got to carry out the reasonable instructions of the employer, abide by the contract and a whole series of rules and regulations that govern what you do. And so, not being part of the elite who was allowed to go to university and have an opportunity to innovate and do stuff they wanted to do, the majority of workers are in the jobs that perhaps they didn't really want. and they have no opportunity in the workplace to innovate, to put their own ideas forward. And that's not how it works. And with the division of labour and mass production, I mean, before the factory system, artisans and tradesmen would produce goods, build things, have a relationship with a customer, innovate and provide for customers' needs. But with the invent of the factory system, and certainly with the production line system, there's no chance that people would be able to innovate at all. People are on a production line, and with the division of labour, sometimes you're working on a piece of something, and quite often the people making that piece of something wouldn't even know what the final product was, possibly, and it caused it was massively advantageous to accelerate the production process, but it also was a sort of negative side as well for the employer, because if you remember, there was big labour disputes because the pay bargaining, rather than being at national level and directed by sort of right-wing trade union leaders, it was very much pushed down into the factory and in the workplace, and it built the shop stewards movement. And you would have piece rates, you know? So a lot of power went into the workplace, but it was just really graft, if you like, you know. Innovation and creativity didn't exist, and sort of fairly recently, the sort of the Japanization, as sometimes it's been referred to, this sort of just-in-time process of production has refined the production line. I remember it must have been 20 or 30 years ago when I went up to Sunderland to see how the new systems were being run. And I was taken around the plant, and it was really interesting to see how new technology was affecting the production line then. You know, where in the old days you'd have one vehicle coming along fairly slowly, and people would do things on it, it'd go to the next way, and it was all the same vehicle. With the just in time, there's all sorts of different models of the same vehicle, and because the technology was working, so that you could have a car which had different wheels on it, you know, because you know you get these models when you buy a car these days. Some have got different things in them, others, and they was doing them on the one production line because it was able to do it just in time. And the suppliers as well run into this just-in-time process, and it doesn't. And of course, it's not just affecting production line. Really, almost all production now is a production services is a production line. You know, the supermarkets, they're relying on stuff coming in. They don't hold massive stocks of stuff. They're relying on stuff coming in and going out at the right time. They're relying on those who are supplying them, the firms and down the road sometimes that are supplying in the meat products and stuff like that. They're actually relying it comes in at the right time. It's a lot of power now that workers have got if they only understood it, because you can very, very, very quickly. It's one of the things that illustrates whether you've got power or not in a workplace, is you can very quickly affect the product, and it certainly can. But they've of course in this process introduced a much more covert and subtle form of coercion, which was the using the mission statements, team working, the belief in the company, getting workers to cooperate. It was in their interests, and this, that, and the other. I honestly don't, and with robotics, I've got no bloody clue now. I ought to go and visit a factory with the robotics now, but where there's even less people working. But the just-in-time method and the mission statements and all the rest of it. I mean, we fought it very hard in Royal Mail and managed to keep it well at bay for a long period of time. They do some of it now, but people recognise what it was at the end of the day. It's to lull people in a false sense of security, so they could be exploited and got rid of at a later period of time. And so not only do they want your labour power and buy it, they want to buy your mind as well. They want you to think in a certain way and agree to do things in a certain way. I remember not long before I retired, funnily enough, we had some guy came in and he was going to talk to us about the soft skills, they call it. How to answer the telephone properly, you know, and stuff like that and things. And I was arguing with him in this meeting, his team brief that he's called. He's a national bloke come down to talk to us. And I was arguing with him, and a few times I corrected him, and he threw me out the meeting because I was disrupting his flow and his attempts to indoctrinate the staff. So that is the workplace as it is. I won't go on much. I'll go on for just a couple of minutes because there's not a lot of time for people to come in, and just say, so when we want to talk about workers having some control, you know, we've got to be in the position where we are, as well as the consumers and others, be in control of the workplace, and so we break the back of this master-servant relationship. And I was looking recently at the local government, in the council processes. We had a commission come to look at the civic participation in democracy. It was quite an interesting thing to see, and they're talking about citizens' assemblies, where you get a group of people. They mail out thousands of people, and they choose by sortition a cross section of the public, and then they actually give them real responsibility to deal with something. One of the things that's quoted quite a lot is the right to choose, the abortion issue in Ireland, which has been a very controversial issue, as you might expect from a very predominantly Catholic country, and that they and because mainly these are hot potatoes that politicians don't want, and so they can produce a citizen assembly, and they worked on it. They worked at weekends. They were able to interview witnesses, interview people. Politicians was involved in it as well, and they came to a decision based on a large quantity of people are actually involved in these issues, rather than the representative type of democracy, which I'm not saying we don't have. We want to democratise that as well. Open selection for MPs and workers' wages, and them working, not having excessive amounts of expenses and all that type of stuff, which I would agree with all that. But there's these sort of things of direct democracy that we should be pushing, I think, and quite a good co-production and co-design, where again it's a similar process. where you have to let the directly elected function in local authority, be the council and the councillors, have to devolve the responsibility. And people at the outset start a project with actually blue skies, a blank sheet of paper, and they deal with it from there. And that's how you can use innovation and ideas of working people. And so, as I said before, the vast majority of workers, even in the Western world, have no opportunity to input and their ideas to be taken up, and no ideas in the workplace, none in the community. And this is in the West, where we're supposedly an advanced capitalist country. A lot of educated people can put a few ideas. The vast majority of the world are not even in that position. And so think of all the people resource isn't used, as Pat ended his discussion on, in local communities and in countries that are less developed. So I'm afraid I can't go into the world of abundance and international cooperation, world without wars, and a world plan. But I think Pat touched on the massive potential that there is, and for either moving forward or regressing because of new technology. So probably just end my little contribution there, I think. Thanks.
Thanks, Roy. That's great. That introduces us to the last couple of points before we open it for discussion. You mentioned about reuniting workers and consumers. You know, one of the funny things about under feudalism, that workers and their customers had direct contact and they negotiated over products. But this was lost when we introduced capitalist mass production. We can actually, in a democratic social society, in the format of a democratically, publicly owned system, we can re-establish this relationship on a higher level, and we can start to not only tap into the creativity of the workforce, but also into the customers. And we can involve them in the design of products, improve the functionality, quality, product life, ease of repair, etc. Funnily enough, Jonathan refers to this in his PhD thesis in regards to the Chinese tech companies who've been able to get much closer to their customers. And this is so much better than the lengthy bureaucratic process for product development in the capitalist multinationals. You know, it's not just the workforce and the customers and suppliers who have got great knowledge that is currently not utilized, and as a result, you know, people are basically, as you said, they go to work and they do what they're told, and the customers are faced with a kind of take it or leave it relationship to products, where they just have to buy the product or not. They have no influence over it. But we can also tap into the whole creativity of the wider population. And it's interesting that you know, the present moment, the population is not involved in innovating products and services, hardly at all. And even if they wanted to be, there's many people who've got ideas, but there's no way to advance those. And if you look, it's funny, if you look back in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, all the famous inventors like John Harrison, he was a carpenter. Watt, who developed the steam engine, was a watchmaker. Arkwright was a barber. Fulton was a jeweler. Hargreave was a spinner. You know, they were just ordinary people. And you know, these people. If we could tap into the population as a whole in a democratic social society, we could dramatically improve innovation, and not just in industry, but also in public services. And now, one of the things we put forward that Tim, who's online here, will maybe want to say something about, is we talked about how if we took over the banks into public ownership, one of the great benefits of that is that we could utilize these some of the bank branches, and change them into innovation centers in every area of the country. And then we can bring the ordinary people who've got ideas. You know, society is not encouraging people to come forward with new ideas. We should be doing that through advertising, through education. We should appealing to the population to think of new ideas about how they can improve their, you know, things around them. And they can then go to these innovation centers, and they can be put together with experts who are relevant to that. They can evaluate their ideas, and if those ideas have got any mileage, they can then give finance. A part of the banking system then can provide finance for these things to be worked up and brought into fruition. So these are the possibilities in a democratic social society. Can you imagine the explosion of innovation that we could have, where we could have a network of organizations across the country that would encourage and evaluate this innovation and invest in these ideas and bring inventors directly together with workers, producers, consumers, and users. At the moment, inventions are very much limited under capitalism to a very narrow area of society. And we can see that in this way how innovation could be dramatically improved. Okay, so sorry to say our introduction has been so long, comrades, and I hope it doesn't cut back your time too much. We've got another, well, till the end of the hour, and if you want to carry on discussing, if you're really keen on it, please feel free. Don't forget to unmute yourself when you want to come in. Okay, fire away. And remember, we're recording this so you can watch it again afterwards, and we're sending out the text of it as well. Okay. Any comrade who would like to come in? Maybe you can give examples of your own experience or whatever. Fire away. Don't, you know, feel free to just don't bother putting up your hand. There is a hand function, but we don't need that. So just speak straight away. Themos, fire away.
Well, I think there is such a lot of material that it's very difficult to start discussing. I mean, it's. I'm not sure how to tackle this. I shall say just a few scattered comments here and there. One of the things that it's very interesting here, and I think we should guard against, is not to be afraid of innovation in terms of job losses. I mean, it's a very thin line between this and falling into a Luddite mentality. And actually, this should be one of our advantages in discussing democratic socialism, because one of the differences that there will be under public planning and socialist planning under democratic control is exactly this, that we should actually seek jobs to eliminate. I mean, there is no reason to have truck drivers slugging it out in a really boring living a really boring sort of life. The point is that driverless cars in a capitalist world, they will just throw them to the dogs. I mean, while in a socialist world, it would be a really constructive change of life, a really it would really make a better life out of these people, and it could be planned, and it could be applied. The same applies to various other jobs that that are changing. Factory workers. I mean, it's not something to be to aspire to become a factory worker if it can be done by a machine, and that's a good thing. The tragedy is that people have been trained and have invested in their lives so much in this line that in a capitalist world they will be just useless, and we should exactly stress that their lives can be rejuvenated in a socialist world, and that's the sort of thing that we should be careful not to idealize harsh working conditions under capitalism as if they are something good. They are not, and this is the sort of thing that we should be careful to discuss. I was thinking of right through these presentations of various things, but the idea is actually to embrace innovation and to embrace it in a good way. The second thing that the innovation should be shown that it will change under a socialist society is channeling innovation in certain where it is needed. I mean, it's all well and good to make innovative, expensive sports cars because the only people who can give their money away are the rich people, and for the rest of us just take some spin-offs if they come up, if they trickle down into the market that the rest of us could benefit from them. And that's another thing that I think has been described by the speakers, and it should be brought out more forcefully, I think. And this is because these are our strengths. And this is what matters. And of course, the more we take advantage of people's knowledge and people's experiences, the more innovation we will have. And another thing that we should point out that we are not limiting ourselves to the ideas of the common people. The common people should not be common. Common people should have the same chances and the same abilities as the rest of the people. And one last thing about the universities. I think universities have been dragged down so much in the previous decade, and the way that they operate, they have become what they call competitive, and it's not uncommon to find out that really intelligent people, really productive people, are being thrown out because they don't follow the stupid rules of publishing, of the way they are publishing, the way they are being assessed. With my favorite quote is from Higgs, the theoretician of the Higgs boson, who said, actually today, if I didn't have a Nobel Prize, I would never be able to find work in a university because of the normal ways that scientists are assessed. And we should not idealize universities either, because there is a problem as well. Serious problem because of the commodification of knowledge and the way that they all want to make profit.
Thanks so much. Excellent points. Who else would like to say something? Let's see who we've got online here. So if you don't volunteer, I'm going to call you in. I'm going to try and call you in anyway. Stefan, would you like to say anything? Like to comment? Are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you. Well, short answer is no. I don't want to to say something. Well, I could inflict one small piece from real life. My cousin in Gothenburg is her husband. He tried to make a living as an innovator for most of his life until it didn't work anymore. So at the age of 55, he started to study high school. His last formal degree was when he ended school at the age of 15, so had to start from there and study, and 6 years later he could enter the technological university, and at the age of 60 something could get a proper job. But all right, he tried to make a living as an innovator, all kinds of ideas. And he says that one idea he had was about clean engines. He had clean, more effective petrol engines, and also diesel engines. And he had one of the ferries, passenger and car ferries between Sweden and Denmark. It's a short route, a couple of hours, and they go back and forth all the day. And he succeeded in letting one of these ferry companies to make one of their motor. They have several motors, apparently, engines, and one of the engines in one ferry, they built into it his innovation, his idea. And they said that the engine has never been so clean before. And but they didn't. After a test period, they mounted it down and went back to their original equipment, because well, of course they had some reason. But after that, he turned to Volvo Motor Corporation, and he presented this idea. Well, first they looked at it, and well, according to him, it was some sort of threat they recognize. So by lobbying, I mean, Volvo Corporation is a powerful player in, and they managed to change the law so that you are not it's not acceptable and according to the law to rebuild an engine by some well, the threat was that his innovation should be built by some third part, and perhaps being you know, built into the Volvo car engines, and by that I mean making them better than when they left the production line and left the factory. So by these measures, they Volvo Car Corporation managed to effectively bury his idea, his innovation. Yeah.
Thanks, Stefan. Well, I think that's obviously an example of the many hurdles that inventors have in trying to get their ideas accepted in a capitalist world, which is full of all kinds of rivalries and strange, untransparent processes that, well, obviously in the Democratic Socialist Society, you'd have an open way of doing these things and evaluating them. Okay, Kabir, can you hear us? Kabir, can you unmute your mic if you're there? Have you got anything you'd like to add? I don't know if Kabir is online. Ah, great, okay.
Hello, comrades.
Kabir.
I think many aspects have been covered by you and Roy and Themos. He added few more points in that. The thing which I could understand that the difference between planned economy or a socialist society and a capitalist society, the fundamental point which differentiate both of them are, in capitalism, innovation determines by the profit making and the greed to increase the profit ratio. But when we move towards a socialist society where the planning is dominated, I think there should be a conscious efforts to innovate the things in order to facilitate the societies. This is what I think the fundamental difference between both of the things, both of the societies. So even though we have examples, you have covered many things. Indeed, and instead of this, that the Soviet society, particularly, when we take the example of that, when revolution occurred in 1917, that was a backward society of that time. Instead of that, they developed the things, even though there was a bureaucratic top-down model of the state, and there was not participatory democracy in that society. Instead of that, they invented, they innovated a lot of things. And they developed in many aspects, in many spheres of life. But there may be different reasons behind this, that they could, even instead of this all, they could not touch the peak of the development of the capitalist societies, particularly of the Western societies. And that is one of the reasons that even though there were many other reasons as well, but this is one of the reasons that they could not compete, they could not attract the masses across the world. But as you have discussed, you have taken the example of the China. They adopted few of the methodologies which the capitalist world adopted. And with planning and markets, with the combination of both, they developed and they competed the world. And today we can see that even though the American imperialism used to dominate the world for decades, but today we can see that with projects, with investment, with many things, Chinese are penetrated in the whole world. So as we might have discussed this before, that at one stage, the copyright, the intentions and the efforts of the copyrights, the American imperialism and the Western world, they were very keen to protect the copyrights. But if we look today, the leading state is the Chinese. They are trying to protect the copyrights today. So this is only because of this that in innovation, in development, Chinese has crossed in many aspects, the US imperialism and the Western world as well. So at last, I would just say that innovation is the necessity and the demand for survival even of a capitalist in a capitalist world, in a capitalist society. But in a socialist society, there would be a conscious efforts, one of the conscious planning aspect which would innovate the things, and the thing which make it more rich, or which can make it more rich, that is that in a capitalist world, few of the think tanks or the paid employees, they are put on a duty to innovate the things, to do the research. But in a planned economy, I think the capability and the capacity will be much more because the whole society can participate in that. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Kabir. Great points. Brilliant. How about Yen? Would you like to say anything? Yen? If so, perhaps you could unmute your mic. Hello, Yen. I don't know if you're still with us. If not, how about Mike? Mike Rahman, how about you, Mike? Would you like to contribute? You've got to unmute your mic in the bottom left-hand corner if you want to come in. Okay, well, just in case they're getting ready to do that. How about you, Sajjad? Would you like to say something?
Well, I think you and Rai give very excellent presentation about the innovation under planning and commercialization in a socialist society. How would be? I think you covered most of the aspects. I'm not thinking to say much more about that.
Okay. All right. Thanks, man. Great.
Yeah,
Tim.
nothing much to hear.
Okay, yeah, great. Okay, yeah. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, it's very useful discussion. Yeah, very useful. Yeah, I enjoyed it. So nothing, just listening, understanding. Yeah, thanks so much, Pat. Yeah.
No problem. Yeah. Great. Tim, how about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I just want to know whether you hear me, whether it's coming through.
Yes, we're hearing you good. Okay. We're hearing you good.
Because the other way, it's not so clear. But okay. Well, just to come back on what you mentioned about how democratically running banks could contribute to, to the whole process of developing ideas that people have for innovation. Usually. What usually happens is that somebody with money takes over the ideas before they've even gotten very much further than just being ideas, and then most likely they will sell it to a bigger company. Then again, so you have a whole chain of speculation that goes that goes before even anybody start to evaluate and to certainly to put it into production. And for new ideas to get to the phase where there's actually production, you need there's a lot of different components that you need to bring together. Of course, you probably need some maybe some universities or some scientific institutions to look at what you're, depending on what you're trying to develop. You'll need the banks to come in and provide credits, and you'll need people who know how to set up production lines in the best way. And then again, you need people who will come to take care of marketing. And exactly like Pat said, the banks are could be a perfect tool to bring all of this together, especially because the main thing that you need if you have an idea is money, and so your first stop may be the bank, and because the banks are now only looking at things in terms of profitability. Of course, you would be looking at a totally different kind of response that these people could get from the banks, because as Roy mentioned, their innovative ideas can not only be judged by whether they can produce profit, but a lot of them can have valuable effects for society and for people in general. Without ever really being valued on a market basis. And so when we were talking about the banks, when we were trying to develop the campaign, because we were saying that the approach of the banks towards anybody who step into the bank for some advice will be different, because it will be honest and it will be based on a true desire to try to help the clients. And that would be the same if there would be an innovation center that would be supported by the banks. The projects wouldn't just be evaluated by whether they would be able to create a profit for somebody, but also based on the usefulness. And there could be centers with their contacts to all the different people who need to somehow get involved for something like that to be realized. So yeah, surely there's a huge potential. Lots of wasted talents and ideas are just going down the drain, not being used because people don't have the contacts and the means to realize them. And very often people are getting cheated before they even get started, exactly because it's better to get a few thousand euros or pounds or dollars than just to let it die. So anyway, that's my contribution.
Could you hear me, Pat?
Yeah, Mike, we can hear you. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, well, greetings everyone. I have been listening to the conversation, the discussion in and out, and I am on the road. I'm on the road driving because I had a number of people came to see me. I couldn't avoid them, but I was listening. I couldn't hear every single thing, but I heard Yen and I heard the other comrades. But what this discussion tells is that the whole question of new technology. Because look, I am driving. It's raining heavily here, and I am hearing every word you all say. I'm sure you can hear me too. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Everybody hearing me?
Yeah.
Well, that's globalization. That shows how far we have moved. And Pat, you're right when you say that when you were a trade unionist, I too, we didn't have this possibility. Now we have huge possibility. And I think that living next to Brazil, we're a neighbor of Brazil and Venezuela. We need to make use of the contacts that we have in these countries, trade unions and so on, and bring them together in a more innovative manner. Because what I think our group needs to do is to get areas of specialization. Areas of specialization meaning people specialize in different subject matter, so that we can share the experiences and make the fullest use of ideas and make it possible for us to be able to educate millions of young people all over the world. I mean, I was amazed to see how the capitalist class was defeated in America yesterday when that elderly fellow won that election over the Kennedy tribe. It was amazing. It shows how they were able to, younger people, OAC and them were able to use new technology, and they were able to defeat the Kennedys, who are part of this ruling class. So I'm highly inspired. I just come back into my house, and it's terrible rain, but I can still hear everybody, and I can see you, Pat, with your long hair. I didn't know your hair was so long. You look like a bit of a mafia. So that is what I had to say.
Okay, Mike. Thanks very much. Good. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anybody else like to come back as further discussion? Unfortunately, the Khalid from Lahore, as I think he must have lost his internet connection because he went off. I know normally likes to make a contribution on these sort of things. I mean, on the points, I think what Themis was saying, it's very good points about how, you know, we need to give examples about how we could utilize, how we could research and develop in much better areas than they're being done by capitalism. And also about, certainly about how, you know, we should welcome new technology. There is a kind of image on a large section of the left which gives this image of being very backward looking and wanting to go back to the 60s, you know, that kind of period, and who is because you often find that struggles are mounted against new developments, and that gives the impression that the left is that the capitalists forward-looking and trying to make changes in technology and so on, whereas the left are trying to hold them back. And I think it's, while such defensive struggles are necessary, I think we've always got to, as Themos put, we've got to put it in a positive light, that we actually do welcome these saving of jobs and unnecessary work, but we want to do it in a different way. Is that we want you know, shorter working hours. We want people to be able to do better kind of jobs, or satisfying kind of jobs. We welcome technology, but under our control and under our direction, under social direction, and not we being at the mercy of it and it being introduced just by people in power who want to save money and throw us on the scrap heap. So I think that was a good, very good point he made there, which we've got to get across in our conclusion. I don't know about how the other comrades feel about this, but I you know, in going into this question of innovation, it actually threw up a lot more things than I was expecting. And what it did was it made me realize this this manifesto we're developing, it's going to be a very credible program, and it's going to answer a lot of the questions, so that, you know, instead of it just being the standard socialist propaganda kind of pamphlet, it's actually going to offer ordinary people who've got these questions in their mind, it's going to offer them you know, a credible way forward. And I think that through this, I think we can reach a lot of people on the left across internationally. So one idea has been brought forward, is that maybe we could, next year, maybe we could, one of the Pakistani comrades suggested that maybe we could organize an event towards, say, in the autumn or something. Maybe in Turkey again, I don't know, because it's very easy for a lot of people to get to, but it could be anywhere else. That's not the key question. But we could invite a lot of people to come to it who like what we put forward in the manifesto. So that's an idea for us to think about. You know, that I think we could appeal to a lot of people with the content of what we're pushing here, which you don't find on the rest of the left. For example, I have done research for this stuff, and you find a little piece here, a little piece there, but nothing like this written generally on the left. And so I think what we're putting forward here is going to be very original to a lot of people. And if we get we'll do drafts. We'll do a draft of it, so we can then comrades can polish it more. We can get the ideas across well. Roy, would you like to come in on anything that we've been said?
Yeah, okay. Just a couple of things. One of what you've just said about getting the message out and what people's views are, in a sense. I was looking at the education issue, and what I'd read, you know, the education, because the lack of innovation, lack of creativity in schools, I'm told, a long time since I was at school, you know, with the fight for passing exams, you know, it's like a factory. A student comes in one end, and the task is to get them to pass so many exams and come out the other end. And a lot of creativity is lost. Particularly, I read a very interesting example of someone who worked for NASA. You know, it was asked by NASA, the space agency. They wanted to find out amongst all the people who work for them, who were the most creative and innovative, because if you're on a space race, it's a new field. You've got to really have creative people and people who are prepared to take risks and stuff like that. And they wanted him to provide a test for it. And he did that, and it worked very well, apparently. And it wasn't a very difficult test. I just think I can find it on on my thing here. Yeah, it was the test was to look at a problem and come up with it with new, different, innovative ideas. And apparently that was quite successful in essence. So the guy who did it for them, he decided to conduct a research study to test the creativity of 1,600 children, and they were ranges from the age of 3 years to 5 years. So it was a very simple way of measuring. Now, does anyone want to have a guess of amongst 5-year-olds, what was the proportion of people who scored genius level out of those 5-year-olds? What was the percentage? Anyone want to? I'll give you 5 seconds to put it in the chat or shout out. And if you don't, it means you're like an old fart like me who doesn't work technology very well. So my daughter will have an answer straight away. Anyone? The percentage of 5-year-olds who got the genius level in this test? Okay, no one's answering. I'll tell you, it was 98%. And so they decided to project it on a linear basis, and they give the test to 10-year-olds, the same people. And I've forgotten what the time was between it, actually. But the 10-year-olds, it was 30% got the genius level, and 15-year-olds, it was 12%. It went down. Rather than people being more creative, it went down. And they tested 280,000 random adults, average age of 31, and they got 2% in this test on creativity. And so I was asking my daughter about this. I said, you think they're like factories there now, and I said about the creativity, and he said, oh, people like you come up and talk about creativity. That's what the Tories are wanting to introduce, creativity and more subjects, she said. And she said, and I tell you who's going to suffer? The working class, because it'll be the middle classes who's going to benefit from this. And she says, what you have to do with the working class, you have to drill them and get them through, and that's what's the best thing for them. So it made me think, that in our manifesto, but the balance has to be drawn, and we have to test it out on people, because people will come back with some possibly things we won't expect, and we can sort of adjust them and develop the manifesto in that way. The other thing that I thought was interesting, but the ideas mustn't be just for the rich. And, and it's interesting that although it was the public sector who developed all this new tech, particularly through the space race, and the groups that were given responsibility for developing ideas were given money, and they given the freedom to make mistakes and all the rest of it. But to actually analyze what people need, as opposed to what the capitalists might bog people to, these are two different things. And one of the things it made me think is about wheelchairs. I mean, because of the Olympics and the Paralympics got favors, you've got these magic forms of wheelchair that have been produced. Super things. Except when my dad was ill. Not long ago, he's passed away now, but when he was ill, I had a wheelchair, and it was like, and I sat in it, and it was like, it didn't have no suspension in it whatsoever. You couldn't guide it properly. It hit a little a half-inch bump in the curb, and it would stop, So because of the Paralympics, all this energy and innovation went into developing something that was really good, really fast, for the athletes, Olympic athletes. For the ordinary disabled person, nothing, you see. So it's certainly not, I agree entirely, and this is where getting this, the innovation down to more people is really important, because they will come up with problems that they have. And just one more thing, on this question of the what the capitalists will take up. I don't know if any people have seen this program on UK TV called The Dragon's Den. They have about half a dozen entrepreneurs all sitting in these chairs with their stacks of money by the side, and people come up one by one with their inventions, and they have to get the dragons to say, yes, I'll go 50-50 on that invention, or I'll give you 10% of the money. They're asking for some money from these people. And some people get some really good inventions, but you know, all these dragons, every single one of them, but not only do they want to know the invention, they want to know how much money they've put in, what the production is, how many companies have already taken this up, what is the likelihood of this and that happening. You know, they want a ready-made, guaranteed product that they're going to make a load of money out of, you know, and you can't do that when you're innovating. You've got to be prepared to take risks, and they aren't. That sums it up for me. The capitalists aren't prepared to take the risks necessary to put money into investment into innovation. We know that's what happens. So yeah, that's just that's two or three things I picked up on. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Roy. That was a good, I think, probably a good ending to the discussion. I think we've come to the end of our time now, haven't we? It's about 2 hours. And thank for everyone to participate, and hope you found it good and useful. Now, the next and last session of these open discussions is going to be on the subject of the future of China. We've covered how China got to where it is now, and the nature of Chinese society in an earlier session. And we wanted to have a session, like a free form idea on ideas for how China could advance. And that would obviously involve the question of what kind of democratic participation, what balance between private, public, and so on. Because we don't want to, you know, in our comments on China in the manifesto, we don't want to just say everything in the garden in China is rosy, which it isn't. And we don't want to just be seen as complete supporters of the Chinese regime, which we aren't, of course. We want to give a positive, I think our approach is a...
There are two houses at the back.
Sorry? Yeah, sorry. I think our approach will be more one of positive support for China, defense against imperialism, and you know, positive critical proposals for how we would like to see China develop, and applying the other ideas in the manifesto to China as China is a real living, breathing example of the kind of society we want to move towards in the future. I think that, you know, that makes sense. So that's what we're planning to have a session on. We'll try to produce a paper beforehand, and I don't think we need a particular comrade to introduce the session. I think all of us can. We'll try and put in the paper. We'll put a lot of ideas, and we'll involve Jonathan Heiko, we'll involve Joe Lin, you know, one of the Chinese comrades who was involved earlier, and we'll just have a free-flowing discussion and see what comes out of that. Hopefully, some good ideas. All right, comrade. So, if that's okay, let's do this a month's time, same place, kind of thing, which would be the first Wednesday of October, which would be the 7th. Is that okay? Is that okay with comrades?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, 7th. So I think it's going to be a very interesting session, given all the controversy that's going on. And in that session, obviously, we can deal with all of the charges against China, you know, that they've been made about you know, the fights they had with India on the border, and Xinjiang, what's happening with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and the question of surveillance state, the question of Hong Kong, the question of South China Sea. We can discuss all those things within that context, and perhaps come forward with a, you know, we've got already got some ideas down on this. We'll circulate those, and comrades can come up with their own. And by the way, we've just finished an article on Hong Kong, which we're going to hope to publish this weekend. Okay, so that'll be interesting as well. That'll relate to this a little bit. All right, comrades. So see you on the 7th of October. Okay.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care,
Bye.
comrades.
Bye-bye.
Leave.